The stagecoach lurched violently over another rut in the dusty Colorado road, and Florence Calloway pressed her gloved hand against the window frame to steady herself, wondering for the 100th time if she had made the most foolish decision of her entire 22 years. The letter had arrived at the Boston boarding house 3 months ago, written in a surprisingly elegant hand for a rancher. Mr. Yates Donovan had described himself as a widower of considerable means, owner of a prosperous cattle ranch near the mining town of Animas Forks, Colorado, and in need of a wife to help manage his household. He had been forthright about his age, stating he was 57 years old and had promised to treat her with respect and kindness. Most importantly, he had enclosed enough money for her passage west, plus an additional sum that had allowed her to purchase 2 decent dresses and settle her debts. Florence had no romantic illusions about the arrangement. At 22, she was considered past her prime in Boston society, and her family's financial ruin after her father's death had left her with no prospects beyond working as a seamstress for pennies or accepting charity from relatives who made their disdain abundantly clear. The thought of becoming a wife, even to an older man she had never met, offered dignity and security she could not otherwise hope to attain. The landscape outside the window had transformed dramatically over the past weeks of travel. The familiar greenery of the east had given way to endless plains, and then to the dramatic peaks and valleys of the Colorado mountains. Animas Forks sat at over 11,000 feet elevation, the letter had mentioned, and Florence could feel the thinness of the air with each breath. The stagecoach driver called out that they would arrive within the hour. Florence's stomach twisted with anxiety. She pulled out a small mirror from her reticule and examined her reflection. Brown hair neatly pinned beneath her traveling bonnet, gray eyes that appeared too large in her pale face, and a mouth that her mother had once said was too wide for true beauty. She pinched her cheeks to bring some color to them and tucked away the mirror. What would he think of her? The single photograph she had sent had been taken 2 years ago, before the hardship had carved hollows beneath her cheekbones and added worry lines to her forehead. Would he be disappointed? Would he still want to marry her? The town of Animas Forks appeared suddenly as they crested a ridge. It was smaller than she had imagined, a collection of wooden buildings clustered along a single main street, with mining equipment visible on the surrounding hillsides. The mountains rose dramatically on all sides, their peaks still white with snow even though it was late June of 1881. The stagecoach rolled to a stop in front of a building marked as the general store. Florence's heart hammered in her chest as the driver opened the door and offered his hand to help her down. Her legs felt unsteady after so many hours of travel, and the thin mountain air made her slightly dizzy. "Miss Calloway." A man's voice spoke from behind her. Florence turned, preparing her first smile for her future husband, and found herself staring not at the gray-haired gentleman she had expected, but at a young man who could not have been more than 25 years old. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that curled slightly beneath his worn hat, and eyes that were in startling shade of blue-green. Dust covered his clothes, and he had the weathered complexion of someone who spent his days working outdoors. "Yes," she said uncertainly, confused. Perhaps this was a ranch hand sent to collect her. The young man removed his hat and held it against his chest. His expression was serious, almost nervous. "I am Yates Donovan. Surprise. It is me you are marrying." Florence felt the blood drain from her face. "That cannot be." "Mr. Donovan is 57 years old. He wrote so in his letters. That was my uncle, Uncle Yates Donovan Sr. He passed away 6 weeks ago. Heart gave out while he was mending a fence." The young man's voice was gentle but firm. "The ranch is mine now, and with it, all his obligations, including his promise to you. The world seemed to tilt beneath Florence's feet. She reached for the stage-coach wheel to steady herself. "Your uncle is dead." "Yes, madam. I am sorry you had to find out this way. I sent a telegram to Boston, but you must have already left." He stepped closer, his eyes full of concern. "You look pale. Please, let me help you somewhere you can sit down." "I do not understand." Florence's voice came out barely above a whisper. "You are saying that the man I traveled all this way to marry is dead, but you intend to marry me in his place. If you will have me." Yates replaced his hat and gestured toward a building across the street. "Please, Miss Calloway, let me get you something to drink and explain properly. You have had a long journey, and this news must be a terrible shock." Florence allowed him to take her elbow and guide her across the dusty street. Her mind was reeling. Everything she had prepared herself for over the past 3 months had just been upended. An older widower seeking companionship and household help was one thing. A young man barely older than herself was something else entirely. The building was a small restaurant that also served as a boarding house. Yates led her to a table near the window and ordered water and coffee from the proprietress, a stout woman with kind eyes who looked at Florence with sympathy. "Mrs. Henderson knows the whole situation," Yates said as he sat down across from Florence. "Half the town does, I suppose. Uncle Yates was well known, and when he started corresponding with you, he made no secret of it. He was excited to have a wife again. His first wife, my Aunt Sarah, died 10 years ago, and he had been lonely." Florence accepted the glass of water with shaking hands and took a long drink. The cold mountain water helped clear her head somewhat. "Tell me what happened." Yates leaned forward, his forearms resting on the table. His hands were work-roughened, she noticed, with calluses and a few healing cuts. These were hands that did hard labor. "I came to live with Uncle Yates 5 years ago after my own parents died of influenza. I was 20 then. He taught me everything about running the ranch, and we worked side by side. He was more than an uncle to me. He was like a father." There was genuine grief in his voice, and Florence felt a pang of sympathy despite her own shock and confusion. 6 weeks ago, he complained of pain in his chest and arm. Doc Wilson came out to the ranch, told him to rest, but Uncle Yates was stubborn, said the fence needed mending before the cattle got into the north pasture. I found him there that evening. Yates paused, swallowing hard. "He went quick, at least, did not suffer long." "I am sorry for your loss," Florence said quietly. "Thank you." Yates met her eyes directly. "After the funeral, I found all his correspondence with you. The last letter he had written but not yet posted was sitting on his desk. He had been planning to meet your stagecoach himself. He was counting the days." The coffee arrived, and Florence wrapped her hands around the warm cup, even though the late afternoon was not particularly cold. She needed something to hold on to. "I read through all the letters," Yates continued. "I hope you do not think that was improper, but I needed to understand what promises had been made to you. Uncle Yates told you about the ranch, about the house, about what he could offer as a husband. All of that is still true. The ranch is mine now, and it is prosperous. The house is large and comfortable, and I am in need of a wife. But you are young," Florence said, the words coming out more bluntly than she intended. "You are what, 25? Surely you could court someone locally or write to other women who would be expecting a young husband." "I am 25, yes." Yates took a sip of his own coffee. "And you are right, I could do those things. But Miss Calloway, you traveled all this way in good faith. You trusted the word of a Donovan. My uncle gave his promise to marry you, to provide for you, to treat you with respect and kindness. He might be gone, but I will not have the Donovan name broken by his death. I mean to honor his promise." Florence stared at him, trying to understand. You would marry me out of obligation, out of family honor. Is that so different from why you agreed to marry my uncle?" Yates's voice was not unkind, but it was honest. "We both know this was not a love match to begin with. You needed security and a home. I can provide those things just as my uncle would have. And I need—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "A ranch is a lot of work for one man. I have hired hands who help with the cattle, but a house needs a woman's touch. And I will not pretend it would not be good to have company. It gets lonely up there in the winter." "You are offering a marriage of convenience," Florence said slowly. "I am offering exactly what my uncle offered. A home, security, respect, an honest partnership." Yates leaned back in his chair. "I know I am not what you expected. I know this whole situation is not what you expected. If you want to refuse, if you want me to pay for your passage back to Boston, I will do so. I will not force any woman to marry me, but if you are willing, I would be honored to be your husband." Florence looked down at her coffee, her mind racing. Return to Boston. To what? The boarding house had rented her room the day she left. Her few remaining relatives had made it clear she was a burden. Her only friend who might have taken her in had married and moved to Philadelphia. But to marry this stranger, this young cowboy who was honoring a dead man's promise, it seemed absurd. Yet as she looked at Yates Donovan's weathered face, she saw sincerity in his eyes. He was not trying to deceive her. He was not making promises he did not intend to keep. He was simply stating facts and offering a choice. "I need time to think," she said finally. "Of course." Yates stood up. "Mrs. Henderson has a room upstairs where you can stay tonight. Tomorrow, if you like, I can show you the ranch so you can see what you would be agreeing to. You do not have to decide immediately." "Thank you." Florence also rose, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was from the long journey. "I will have your trunk brought up from the stage-coach." Yates put his hat back on. "Miss Calloway, I know this is not what you wanted. I am sorry for that. But I promise you, if you agree to this marriage, I will do everything in my power to be a good husband to you." He left before she could respond, and Florence sank back into her chair. Through the window, she watched him cross the street to where the stagecoach driver was unloading luggage. He moved with an easy confidence, at home in this rough mountain town in a way Florence knew she might never be. Mrs. Henderson appeared at her elbow. "Let me show you to your room, dear. You look about ready to drop." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. Florence's trunk was delivered shortly after, and she changed out of her traveling clothes into a nightgown, even though it was only early evening. She was too tired to eat, too overwhelmed to think clearly. She lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere in this town was a young man she had just met, a man who wanted to marry her to honor his dead uncle's promise. It should have seemed ridiculous, but there was something about Yates Donovan's straightforward honesty that she respected. He had not tried to deceive her or manipulate her. He had simply told her the truth and offered her a choice. But could she really marry him? Could she tie her life to a stranger, even one who seemed honorable? The alternative was to return to Boston, to poverty and charity and the slow grinding down of her spirit. At least here in this strange mountain town, she would have a purpose, a home. Work to do that mattered. Florence must have fallen asleep at some point because she woke to full darkness and the sound of her own stomach growling. She got up, relit the lamp, and found that someone, probably Mrs. Henderson, had left a tray with bread, cheese, and cold meat on the small table. She ate gratefully, then washed her face in the basin and brushed out her hair. Through the window, she could see the town was not entirely asleep. Light spilled from a saloon down the street, and she could hear the faint sound of a piano and male voices. It was Saturday night, she realized. In Boston, she might have been at a church social or reading in her small room at the boarding house. Here, she was thousands of miles from everything familiar, contemplating a marriage to a man whose face she had seen for the first time just hours ago. She slept fitfully and woke early to the sound of wagons and voices in the street below. When she went downstairs, Mrs. Henderson had breakfast waiting: eggs, bacon, and fresh bread with butter. "Mr. Donovan said he would come by mid-morning to take you out to the ranch if you are willing," the older woman said as she poured coffee. "He is a good man, dear. I know this situation is unusual, but you could do far worse." "Did you know his uncle?" Florence asked. "Oh yes, Yates Sr. was a fixture in this town. Came here during the mining boom in the late 60s, but he was smart enough to see that cattle would outlast silver. He built up that ranch from nothing. Honest as the day is long and treated everyone fair. The younger Yates is cut from the same cloth." Florence absorbed this information as she ate. It was helpful to hear an unbiased assessment, though she knew Mrs. Henderson might have her own reasons for wanting to see the marriage happen. Yates arrived at precisely mid-morning, driving a sturdy wagon with 2 horses. He had cleaned up since yesterday, she noticed. His clothes were still work-worn but freshly laundered, and he had shaved. He helped her up onto the wagon seat with careful courtesy. "It is about 5 miles to the ranch," he said as they started moving. "The road is decent in summer, but it can be challenging in winter when the snow gets deep." The town fell away behind them as they headed up a winding mountain road. The scenery was breathtaking. Peaks rose on all sides, some still snow-capped despite the summer season. Wildflowers dotted the meadows they passed, brilliant splashes of color against the green grass. A creek ran alongside the road, its water crystal clear and fast-moving. "It is beautiful," Florence said, and meant it. "It can be harsh, too," Yates said honestly. "Winters are long and cold, we get snowed in for weeks sometimes, and the altitude takes getting used to, but it is home." They passed through a gate marked with a brand, a circle with a D inside. "That is the ranch brand," Yates explained. "Circle D for Donovan. We run about 300 head of cattle across 2,000 acres." The ranch house came into view around a bend, a substantial 2-story structure made of logs with a wide porch across the front and stone chimneys at either end. Behind it were a barn, corrals, and several outbuildings. Mountains rose dramatically in the background, making the scene look almost like a painting. Yates pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "Would you like to see inside?" Florence nodded, her heart beating fast. This could be her home, she realized. This beautiful, isolated place in the mountains. The interior of the house was better than she had expected. The main room had a large stone fireplace, comfortable furniture, and windows that let in plenty of light. The kitchen was well equipped with a large stove, a good-sized table, and ample storage. Upstairs were 4 bedrooms, 2 on each side of the central hallway. Uncle Yates and Aunt Sarah had hoped to have children, Yates said quietly as they stood in the hallway. "That is why the house is larger than needed for 1 person, or even 2. He showed her what would be her bedroom if she agreed to the marriage. It was spacious, with a large bed, a wardrobe, a dressing table, and windows overlooking the mountains. The room next to it was his, he explained, so she would have privacy, but they would be close if she needed anything. "I know that a marriage of convenience is not the same as a love match," Yates said, his voice carefully neutral. "I would not presume anything. You would have your own space." Florence felt herself blushing but appreciated his directness. "That is considerate of you." They went back downstairs, and Yates showed her the rest of the property. The barn housed 6 horses, including a gentle mare he said would be hers if she wanted to learn to ride. The chickens in the coop would provide eggs. There was a large garden plot that had been neglected since his uncle's death, and Yates admitted he had no skill with growing vegetables. "That is something I could manage," Florence said, examining the plot. She had helped tend gardens in Boston and knew her way around plants. "There is a root cellar under the house for storage," Yates continued, "and a good well that never runs dry. We are fairly self-sufficient up here, though I go into town every week or two for supplies and to sell cattle when needed." They walked along a fence line, and Yates pointed out the different pastures, explaining his plans for the herd and his hopes to expand in the coming years. Florence found herself listening carefully, impressed by his knowledge and his clear vision for the ranch's future. "The hired hands live in the bunkhouse over there." Yates gestured to a smaller building past the barn. "Right now I have 3 men working for me. Miguel, who has been here since Uncle Yates started the ranch, and 2 younger fellows, Tom and Jim. They are good workers, respectful. You would not have to worry about them." They ended up back at the house, sitting on the porch. The view from here was spectacular, looking out over rolling pasture and to the mountains beyond. "What do you think?" Yates asked quietly. Florence took a deep breath. "I think it is more than I expected. The house is beautiful. The land is beautiful. You have built something substantial here." "Uncle Yates built it," Yates corrected. "I am just trying to maintain it and hopefully make it better." "That is still an achievement." Florence turned to look at him. "May I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Why did you never marry before?" "You are 25, established with good prospects. Surely there have been opportunities." Yates was quiet for a moment, staring out at the mountains. "There was a girl 3 years ago. Sarah, named after my aunt. We courted for several months. I thought we might marry." He paused. "She decided she could not live this isolated. She wanted a city, or at least a bigger town. She married a shopkeeper in Durango. I am sorry." "Do not be. She made the right choice for herself. This life is not for everyone." He turned to face Florence. "That is why I am being honest with you about what this would be. It is beautiful, yes, but it is also isolated. In winter, you might not see anyone but me and the hired hands for weeks. The nearest neighbor is 3 miles away. If you need a city, if you need society and parties and shops, this will not make you happy." Florence considered this. "I lived in Boston, which has all those things. But I was poor, practically a servant to my relatives, with no real social life to speak of. The idea of isolation does not frighten me. The idea of having purpose, of building something, of being needed, that appeals to me far more than parties ever did." She saw something shift in Yates's expression, a kind of hope mixed with relief. "Then you will consider marrying me?" he asked. "I have been considering it since yesterday," Florence admitted. "I think what I need to know is what you truly expect from this marriage. You say you will give me my own space, treat me with respect. But what do you want in return? What do you need from a wife?" Yates thought about this seriously before answering. "I need a partner, someone to help run the household, to manage the things I am not good at, someone to talk to in the evenings, someone to share meals with. I need the house to feel like a home again instead of just a place where I sleep." He met her eyes. "And I hope, though I know I cannot expect it, that we might become friends, that we might build something together beyond just a business arrangement." "Friends," Florence repeated. It seemed like a reasonable goal, far more achievable than love. "Yes, I think we could be friends." "Does that mean you will marry me?" Florence looked out at the mountains, at the ranch spread before her, at this life being offered to her. It was not what she had expected when she left Boston, but it was real, solid, full of possibility. "Yes," she said, "I will marry you." The relief on Yates's face was unmistakable. "Thank you. I promise you will not regret it." "When?" Florence asked practically. "When would we marry, as soon as you are ready. There is a minister in town, Reverend Collins. We could marry tomorrow if you wished, or we could wait if you need more time to prepare." "I do not see much point in waiting," Florence said. "I have no family to invite, no preparations to make. If tomorrow suits you, it suits me. Tomorrow, then." Yates stood up, and Florence realized his hands were shaking slightly. He was nervous, she realized. For all his calm demeanor, this was as momentous for him as it was for her. "I will drive you back to town and make arrangements with the Reverend. We will need witnesses. Mrs. Henderson would probably be willing, and I can ask Miguel." The drive back to town was quieter, both of them absorbed in their own thoughts. When they reached Mrs. Henderson's, Yates helped Florence down from the wagon. "Tomorrow at 2 in the afternoon," he said. "At the church." "Is that acceptable?" "Yes." He hesitated, then said, "Miss Calloway, Florence, if I may call you that, I want you to know that I am glad it is you. I read Uncle Yates's letters from you. You write with intelligence and honesty. I think we will suit each other well." It was perhaps the most personal thing he had said to her, and Florence felt warmth spread through her chest. "I hope so. And please call me Florence." "Florence," he repeated, as if testing how it sounded. "Until tomorrow, then." She watched him drive away, this man who would be her husband in less than 24 hours. It felt surreal, like something happening to someone else. But it was her life, her choice, her future. Mrs. Henderson was delighted to hear of the decision, and immediately began fussing over what Florence would wear and what kind of meal should follow the ceremony. "We will have a proper wedding breakfast right here," the older woman declared. "I will make my special roast chicken and biscuits and a cake. You cannot get married without a cake." Florence protested that it was too much trouble, but Mrs. Henderson would not hear of it. "That boy is doing right by you, honoring his uncle's promise. The least we can do is give you both a proper celebration." That evening, Florence sat in her room and wrote a letter to her cousin in Boston, the only person who might care to know what had become of her. She kept it brief, explaining that she had arrived safely in Colorado and would be marrying Mr. Yates Donovan, owner of a prosperous cattle ranch. She did not mention that he was the nephew rather than the man she had expected. It did not seem important, and it was too complicated to explain. The next morning dawned clear and beautiful, and Florence dressed in her best dress, a simple but well-made gown of deep blue that brought out her eyes. Mrs. Henderson helped her with her hair, pinning it up elegantly with small white flowers tucked into the arrangement. "You look lovely, dear," the older woman said, her eyes moist. "Just lovely." At 2 o'clock, Florence walked to the small church at the end of town. Her hands were shaking and her stomach was full of butterflies. She was really doing this. She was marrying a man she had known for less than 2 days. Yates was already there, standing at the front of the church with Reverend Collins. He wore a clean white shirt, a dark vest, and pants that looked new. His hair was neatly combed, and he looked young and nervous and earnest. Miguel stood to one side, a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes, and Mrs. Henderson hurried to take her place as witness. There were a few other townspeople in the pews, curious onlookers who wanted to see the mail-order bride marry young Yates Donovan. Florence walked down the short aisle, very aware that she had no one to give her away, no family to support her. She was alone in this, as she had been alone for so much of her life. But when she reached the front and Yates offered her his arm, his touch was steady and reassuring. He smiled at her, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, and whispered, "You look beautiful." The ceremony was simple and brief. They spoke their vows in clear voices, promising to love, honor, and cherish each other for as long as they both lived. When Reverend Collins pronounced them husband and wife, Yates leaned in and gave Florence the gentlest of kisses, barely more than a brush of lips, respectful and chaste. They signed the register, and then they were married. Florence Calloway was now Florence Donovan, wife of a Colorado rancher, mistress of a house in the mountains. The wedding breakfast at Mrs. Henderson's was surprisingly festive. Several townspeople joined them, bringing gifts and good wishes. Florence met the doctor, the shopkeeper, the postmaster, all people who had known and respected the elder Yates Donovan, and who seemed willing to extend that respect to his nephew and new wife. Miguel presented them with a beautiful quilt that his wife, Maria, had made. "She wanted to come today, but our youngest is sick," he explained in accented English. "She says to tell you welcome to the family, and she hopes to meet you soon." Florence was touched by the gesture and promised to visit Maria as soon as possible. As the afternoon wore into evening, Yates finally said they should head back to the ranch before it got dark. He helped Florence into the wagon, and they set off up the mountain road with her trunk secured in the back. The reality of her situation began to sink in as they drove. She was married. She was on her way to a remote ranch with a man who was essentially a stranger. Tonight she would sleep in a house alone with him, and they would begin the process of learning to live together, to be partners. "You are quiet," Yates observed as they reached the ranch. "Just thinking," Florence admitted, "regretting it already." His tone was light, but she heard the genuine concern underneath. "No, just realizing how much my life has changed in 48 hours. Yates pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "I know it is overwhelming. But we will take things slow, figure it out as we go." He looked at her seriously. "Florence, I meant what I said yesterday. You have your own space. There is no pressure for this to be more than you are comfortable with." She nodded, grateful for his consideration even as she felt a strange flutter of something she could not quite name. He was handsome, she could admit that now, and kind. And when he had kissed her at the church, brief as it was, it had not been unpleasant. They carried her trunk upstairs to her room. Yates had clearly made an effort to make it welcoming. There were fresh flowers in a vase on the dressing table, and the bed was made up with clean linens. "I will let you settle in," Yates said from the doorway. "I need to check on the horses and talk to Miguel about tomorrow's work. When you are ready, come down to the kitchen. We should probably figure out supper." He left, and Florence unpacked her few belongings into the wardrobe and dresser. It did not take long. She had so little. Everything she owned in the world fit into one trunk. She stood at the window, looking out at the evening light on the mountains, and felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. This was her home now, this beautiful, isolated place. And downstairs was her husband, a good man who was trying his best to make this unusual situation work. When she went downstairs, she found Yates in the kitchen, looking somewhat helplessly at the stove. "I usually just fry up some bacon and eggs," he admitted. "I am afraid my cooking skills are limited." "Then it is fortunate you married someone who can cook," Florence said, rolling up her sleeves. "Show me what supplies you have." Together they put together a simple meal of fried ham, potatoes, and greens from the root cellar. They ate at the kitchen table, and the conversation was easier than Florence had expected. Yates told her more about the ranch, about each of the horses and their personalities, about the challenges of the upcoming winter preparations. "We need to get enough hay stored for the cattle, wood chopped for the winter, supplies laid in before the first big snow," he explained. "Once winter sets in, we are mostly cut off until spring." "That sounds lonely," Florence said. "It can be, but it has its own beauty." "The mountains under snow are something to see," he smiled at her. "And this year I will have company." After dinner, they sat in the front room. Yates lit a fire in the fireplace, more for comfort than warmth on the June evening, and they talked more easily than they had before. Florence found herself telling him about her childhood in Boston, about her father's business failure and death, about the difficult years that followed. "I am sorry you went through that," Yates said quietly. "But it takes strength to survive hardship. That strength will serve you well here." As the evening grew late, they both became quiet, the awareness of the sleeping arrangements hanging between them. Finally, Yates stood. "I should turn in. Morning comes early on a ranch." He hesitated. "Florence, I just want to say again, you do not need to worry. Your room has a lock if that would make you more comfortable, though I promise you do not need it. I am a man of my word." "I know," Florence said, and realized she meant it. There was something fundamentally decent about Yates Donovan. "Good night. Good night, wife." He said the last word with a small smile, as if testing it out. "Good night, husband," she replied, and felt her own lips curve upward. She went to her room and changed into her nightgown, then lay in bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling, the wind in the trees outside, the distant call of some night bird. In the room next door, she could hear the faint sounds of Yates moving around, preparing for bed. She was married, to a stranger, in a place she had never seen before 2 days ago. But as she drifted off to sleep, Florence realized she did not feel afraid. She felt, strangely, like she might have found something she had not even known she was looking for. The next weeks fell into a pattern. Florence rose early and made breakfast for herself, Yates, and the 3 hired hands who came up from the bunkhouse. The men were respectful and grateful for the home cooking, often commenting that they had missed having a woman's touch in the kitchen since the elder Yates had died. After breakfast, Yates and the men would head out to work with the cattle or mend fences or handle any of the 100 tasks that kept a ranch running. Florence would clean the house, tend the garden, feed the chickens, and prepare the evening meal. It was hard work, but it was satisfying in a way her aimless days in Boston had never been. Maria, Miguel's wife, came to visit one afternoon with her children. She was a warm, bustling woman who spoke mostly Spanish but made her friendliness clear through gestures and smiles. She brought Florence seeds for the garden and showed her the best places to plant them in the short mountain growing season. "The frost comes early here," Maria explained in halting English. "You must be ready to harvest by September." Florence appreciated the advice and the company. The 2 women, despite the language barrier, found ways to communicate and quickly became friends. Maria's children, 3 lively youngsters aged 8, 6, and 4, were delighted to explore the ranch and play with the kittens in the barn. In the evenings, Florence and Yates would eat dinner together and then often sit on the porch as the sun set behind the mountains. These were the times Florence came to value most. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories of their pasts, discussing plans for the ranch, debating ideas they had read in newspapers and books. "I never expected to marry someone I could really talk to," Yates admitted one evening about 3 weeks after their wedding. "I thought this would be a practical arrangement, nothing more." "But it is more?" Florence asked, her heart beating a little faster. "It is becoming more," Yates said carefully. "At least for me. I find myself looking forward to these evenings, to hearing your thoughts on things." "You have a sharp mind, Florence." "Thank you." She felt herself blushing in the fading light. "I find myself looking forward to them too." Their relationship remained chaste, each of them sleeping in their separate rooms, but Florence was increasingly aware of Yates in ways she had not been at first. The way he moved, confident and graceful despite his size, the sound of his laugh, the kindness in his eyes when he spoke to her or to the animals, the strength in his hands as he worked. More than once, she found herself wondering what it would be like if their marriage was more than just a practical arrangement. but she did not know how to broach the subject, and Yates seemed content with the current state of affairs. July brought intense afternoon thunderstorms that would roll in over the mountains with dramatic suddenness. One afternoon, Florence was in the garden when she saw the sky darken rapidly. She hurried to finish harvesting the lettuce she had been gathering, but the rain came faster than expected, a sudden downpour that soaked her to the skin in seconds. She ran for the house, clutching the basket of vegetables, and burst through the kitchen door just as Yates came in from the other side. He was as drenched as she was, water dripping from his hat and clothes. They looked at each other and simultaneously burst out laughing at the ridiculous picture they must make, both dripping puddles onto the clean kitchen floor. "I did not see that one coming," Yates said, removing his soaked hat. "Me neither." Florence set down her basket and tried to wring water from her skirt. "I should change before I catch cold." "Me too." Yates headed for the stairs, then paused. "Florence, I am glad you are here. I am glad you said yes to this crazy arrangement." "So am I," she said softly. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, some recognition of growing feeling that neither was quite ready to name. Then Yates smiled and headed upstairs, and Florence followed a moment later. As she changed into dry clothes, Florence thought about that look, about the way her heart had skipped when he said he was glad she was there. Was she falling in love with her husband? The idea seemed both wonderful and terrifying. August came, and with it the hard work of haying. Everyone on the ranch, including Florence, was involved in cutting, drying, and storing the grass that would feed the cattle through the winter. It was back-breaking work under the hot sun, and Florence discovered muscles she had not known she had. But there was also a satisfaction in working alongside Yates and the others, in being part of the team that kept the ranch running. Yates treated her as a true partner, asking her opinions on decisions and trusting her judgment on household matters. One evening, after a particularly long day of haying, they were sitting on the porch enjoying the cool evening air when Yates said, "I have been thinking about the winter." "What about it?" Florence asked. "It gets dark early and the nights are long." "I thought maybe I could teach you to read Spanish if you wanted to learn. Miguel has some books, and it would give us something to do during those long evenings. And it would help you talk to Maria better." Florence was touched by the thoughtfulness of the suggestion. "I would like that very much." "And maybe you could teach me something in return," Yates continued. "I noticed you sketching in a notebook the other day. The drawings were good. I never learned to draw." "You want to learn to draw?" Florence was surprised. "Why not? There is a lot of beauty here. It would be nice to capture it." So they made a plan. In the winter, they would teach each other, share skills, fill the long dark evenings with learning and companionship. It was a plan that spoke of a future together, of a relationship that was growing deeper with each passing day. September brought the first frost, just as Maria had predicted. Florence hurried to harvest the last of the garden produce, spending long days canning and preserving everything they would need for the winter. The root cellar began to fill with jars of vegetables, pickles, and preserves. Yates and the men drove the cattle to lower pastures and began the work of sorting out which animals would be sold and which kept for breeding. It was during one of these cattle drives that trouble came. Yates had been gone for 3 days, taking a herd to the market in Durango. Florence was managing the house alone, with just Tom staying behind to handle the daily chores around the immediate ranch. She was in the kitchen making bread when she heard horses approach at speed. Through the window, she saw 3 men she did not recognize ride up to the house. Something about the way they moved, about the looks on their faces, made alarm bells ring in Florence's mind. She quickly wiped her hands on her apron and went to the door, but she did not open it. "Can I help you?" she called through the wood. "We are looking for Yates Donovan," one of the men called back. He was large and rough-looking with a scar across his cheek. "He is not here right now. Can I take a message?" "When will he be back?" Florence hesitated. She did not like the feel of this situation. "I am not certain. Perhaps tomorrow." The men conferred among themselves in voices too low for her to hear. Then the scarred one spoke again. "Tell him Clayton Marsh wants to talk to him about some cattle." "I will pass along the message," Florence said. The men did not leave immediately. They looked around the property, and Florence saw one of them eyeing the barn and outbuildings with an assessing gaze that made her skin crawl. Finally, they mounted up and rode off, but not in the direction of town. They headed up into the hills. As soon as they were out of sight, Florence ran to the bunkhouse to find Tom. The young ranch hand listened to her story with increasing concern. "Clayton Marsh is bad news," he said grimly. "He runs a spread on the other side of the valley, and there have been rumors he is not too particular about whose cattle end up with his brand. If he is sniffing around here, it is trouble." "Should we send someone to find Yates?" Florence asked. "I will ride out and meet him on the road. He should be back this way by now." Tom grabbed his saddle. "You stay in the house and keep the doors locked. If those men come back, do not let them in." Florence spent a tense afternoon and evening alone in the house with the rifle Yates had shown her how to use. She had never fired it, but she knew how, and she kept it near as she went about her chores. It was after dark when she heard horses again. This time she recognized the sound of Yates's horse, and relief flooded through her. She opened the door to find Yates and Tom dismounting in the yard. Yates took one look at her face and was by her side in an instant. "Tom told me. Are you all right?" "I am fine. But those men, Yates, they frightened me. They should have." Yates ushered her inside. "Clayton Marsh has been a thorn in my side since Uncle Yates died. He seems to think I am young and can be intimidated into selling him land or cattle cheap. He is wrong. What will you do?" "Tomorrow I will ride over to his place and make it clear he is not welcome here, and I will have a word with the sheriff in town." Yates looked at her seriously. "Florence, I am sorry you were frightened. I should have warned you about Marsh. You could not have known he would come here." Florence set the rifle aside with shaking hands, only now realizing how tense she had been. Yates saw her trembling and pulled her into a gentle embrace. It was the first time he had held her beyond helping her up into a wagon, and Florence leaned into his warmth, letting the fear and tension drain away. "I am glad you are safe," Yates murmured into her hair. "When Tom told me what happened, all I could think was that I needed to get back here, needed to make sure you were all right." Florence pulled back enough to look up at him. "I am all right. I was frightened, but I am all right." His eyes were intense as they looked down at her. "Florence, I need to tell you something. These past 3 months, getting to know you, living with you, I have realized that this arrangement we made is not enough for me anymore." Florence's heart began to race. "What do you mean?" "I mean that somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking of you as my uncle's mail-order bride, as a woman I married out of obligation. I started thinking of you as mine, as my wife in truth, not just in name." He cupped her face gently in his calloused hands. "I am falling in love with you, Florence. I think I have been for weeks now, but I was afraid to say it, afraid you did not feel the same." Joy bubbled up in Florence's chest. "I do feel the same. I have been feeling the same. I was just afraid to hope that you might care for me as more than a convenient partner. More than convenient, more than partner." Yates's voice was rough with emotion. "You are the best thing that has happened to me, Florence Donovan. When I rode home tonight, all I could think was that if anything had happened to you, I could not bear it. Nothing happened. I am here safe. And I am never leaving you alone like that again, not until we are sure Marsh is no longer a threat." Then he kissed her, and it was nothing like the chaste brush of lips at their wedding. This was a real kiss, deep and passionate and full of all the feeling they had been holding back for months. Florence kissed him back with equal fervor, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I know we agreed to separate rooms to take things slow. But Florence, if you are willing, I would very much like for this to be a real marriage in every sense." "I am willing," Florence whispered. "I want that too." That night, Florence did not sleep in her own room. She went to Yates's room, to their shared bed, and they consummated their marriage with tenderness and passion. Afterward, lying in his arms, Florence felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she belonged. With this man in this place, building a life together. "I love you," she said into the darkness. "I love you too," Yates replied, his arms tightening around her. "My surprising wife, my unexpected blessing." The next morning, true to his word, Yates rode over to the Marsh Ranch with Miguel and Tom. Florence waited anxiously for their return, and when they came back unharmed, she felt relief wash over her. "What happened?" she asked as Yates dismounted. "I made it clear that his cattle had better stay on his side of the fence, and he had better stay off my land. I think he got the message." Yates grinned. "I also happened to mention that the sheriff has been made aware of the cattle rustling rumors, and that everyone will be watching their herds carefully this year. You think he will cause more trouble? Maybe, but not for a while. He knows now that I am not going to be pushed around." Yates pulled Florence close for a kiss, not caring that Miguel and Tom could see. "And he knows I have something worth protecting." As September turned to October, the ranch prepared for winter in earnest. The cattle were moved to the winter pastures. The last of the hay was stored. Wood was chopped and stacked. Florence and Maria worked together to make sure both households had plenty of food preserved. The nights grew colder, and Florence and Yates grew closer. They spent their evenings by the fire, sometimes reading, sometimes talking, sometimes simply enjoying each other's company. The separate bedrooms were abandoned in favor of sharing the larger room that had been Yates's. Florence had never been so happy. The love between her and Yates had blossomed into something beautiful and deep, a partnership of equals who cherished each other. In late October, Florence began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited a few more weeks to be sure before telling Yates, wanting to give him the news when she was certain. On a cold November evening, with the first significant snow of the season falling outside, she finally told him. Yates had just come in from checking on the horses. He was brushing snow from his coat when Florence said, "I have something to tell you." He looked up, immediately attentive. "What is it?" "I am with child. We are going to have a baby next summer." For a moment, Yates just stared at her. Then a huge grin spread across his face, and he let out a whoop of joy that probably startled the horses in the barn. He crossed the room in 3 strides and swept Florence up in his arms, spinning her around. "Careful," Florence laughed. "You will make me dizzy." "A baby." Yates set her down carefully, his hands gentle on her waist. "Florence, that is wonderful news, the best news." "You are happy about it then?" "Happy, I am thrilled." He knelt down and pressed a kiss to her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one." "I am your father, and I already love you so much." Tears sprang to Florence's eyes at the tenderness of the gesture. "I love you, Yates Donovan." "I love you too, Florence Donovan, more than I ever thought it possible to love anyone." The winter that followed was indeed long and cold, with several periods when the snow was so deep and the weather so harsh that they could not leave the ranch for weeks at a time. But Florence did not mind the isolation. She had Yates and the growing life inside her and the cozy warmth of their home. They spent the long winter evenings as they had planned, teaching each other. Yates taught Florence Spanish and she taught him to draw. They read books aloud to each other. They played cards and chess. They talked about their hopes for their child, for the ranch, for their future together. Doc Wilson made it out to the ranch in early December to check on Florence. He pronounced her healthy and told her to expect the baby in late June or early July. First babies sometimes come late, he warned. Do not be surprised if you go past your expected date. As Florence's pregnancy progressed, Yates became increasingly protective and tender. He insisted she not do heavy work, taking over many of her usual chores despite her protests that she was pregnant, not ill. "Humor me," he said when she complained. "I just want to take care of you." Maria was a wonderful help and source of advice, having been through pregnancy 3 times herself. She taught Florence what to expect and helped her prepare clothes and blankets for the baby. Spring came late to the high mountains, but when it finally arrived, it was glorious. The snow melted, revealing green grass and wildflowers. The cattle were moved back to the higher pastures. The garden was planted again, with Florence directing but Yates and Tom doing most of the physical labor. As June approached, Florence grew large and uncomfortable. The baby kicked constantly, and she had trouble sleeping. Yates would rub her back and feet in the evenings, trying to ease her discomfort. "I am sorry you have to go through this," he said one night as he massaged her swollen ankles. "I am not," Florence replied. "This child is worth any discomfort, our child." Doc Wilson came to stay at the ranch in late June, not wanting Florence to go into labor when he could not reach her. He set up in one of the spare bedrooms and spent his days fishing in the creek and his evenings playing chess with Yates. On July 3rd, Florence's labor began. It was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Yates held her hand through it all, wiping her forehead with cool cloths and murmuring encouragement. Maria was there too, having come to help with the delivery. She and Doc Wilson worked together efficiently while Yates hovered anxiously. Finally, on the afternoon of July 4th, Independence Day of 1882, Florence gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The sound of his first cry was the sweetest thing she had ever heard. "A son," Doc Wilson announced, placing the washed and swaddled baby in Florence's arms. "Congratulations to you both." Yates looked down at his son with tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "He is perfect. Florence, you did so well. He is perfect." The baby had a tuft of dark hair, and when he opened his eyes briefly, they were the same blue-green as his father's. Florence felt her heart expand with a love so fierce it almost frightened her. "What should we name him?" she asked. Yates thought for a moment. "What about Oliver? Oliver Donovan. It was my grandfather's name." "Oliver," Florence repeated, testing it. "Oliver Donovan. Yes, I like that very much." As the summer progressed, Florence and Yates settled into parenthood. Oliver was a relatively easy baby, though he kept them up at night with his demands to be fed. Yates was a devoted father, happy to walk the floor with his son in the evenings or change diapers, much to the amusement of the ranch hands. "Never thought I would see Yates Donovan cooing over a baby," Tom said with a grin one morning at breakfast. "You should try it yourself someday," Yates shot back good-naturedly. "Nothing like it in the world." Florence watched her husband with their son and fell even more deeply in love. Yates was everything she could have hoped for in a partner and father: loving, responsible, hands-on, and completely devoted to his family. The ranch continued to prosper. By the fall of 1882, Yates had expanded the herd and built a new barn. The next spring, he hired 2 more men to help with the increased workload. Florence managed the household and took care of Oliver while also keeping the books for the ranch, discovering she had a talent for numbers and business. Clayton Marsh had tried to cause trouble once more, running some of his cattle onto Donovan land and claiming they had strayed. But Yates, with Miguel and the other hands, had driven them back and reinforced the fence line. After that, Marsh seemed to accept that young Yates Donovan was not to be trifled with, and the trouble subsided. Oliver grew from baby to toddler, a bright and active child who loved following his father around the ranch. Yates was patient with his son's endless questions and boundless energy. In the spring of 1884, Florence discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. On a cold December day, she gave birth to a daughter they named Lucy after Yates's mother. Lucy was a calm, sweet-natured baby with Florence's gray eyes and a disposition that contrasted sharply with her energetic older brother. Oliver, now 2.5, was fascinated by his baby sister and wanted to help with everything. The years that followed were busy and full. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Oliver and Lucy grew into healthy, happy children. Yates and Florence grew deeper in love with each passing year. They had challenges, of course. There was the winter of 1886, when a freak blizzard killed several head of cattle. There was the summer of 1887, when drought threatened the hay crop. There was Lucy's bout with pneumonia in 1888 that had them all terrified for weeks, until she finally recovered. But through it all, Florence and Yates faced everything together as true partners. The marriage that had started as an obligation, a surprise substitution that could have been a disaster, had become something beautiful and lasting. On a warm evening in June of 1891, Florence and Yates sat on their porch watching Oliver, now 9 years old, teach 7-year-old Lucy how to rope a fence post. Their third child, a son named Samuel, napped inside. At 3 years old, Samuel was a perfect blend of both his parents, with Florence's brown hair and Yates's blue-green eyes. "Can you believe it has been 10 years since you got off that stagecoach expecting to marry an old man?" Yates asked, his arm around Florence's shoulders. Florence laughed. "I remember being so shocked when you told me. I thought my life was over. And now I cannot imagine my life any other way." Florence leaned into her husband's embrace. "You were the best surprise I ever got, Yates Donovan. Right back at you, Mrs. Donovan." Yates pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "When I made the decision to honor Uncle Yates's promise, I had no idea I was getting such a gift. A partner, a friend, the love of my life, the mother of my children. You are everything to me. And you to me." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch around them. The mountains rose in the distance, purple in the evening light, eternal and unchanging. Florence thought about the frightened young woman who had stepped off that stagecoach 10 years ago, expecting security and nothing more. She thought about how Yates had offered her not just a home but a real partnership, not just obligation but the possibility of love. In the years since, they had built something wonderful together. Not just a successful ranch but a real family. Not just a marriage of convenience, but a love story that had exceeded both their expectations. Oliver successfully roped the fence post and let out a whoop of triumph. Lucy clapped her hands and demanded a turn. Inside, Samuel began to stir from his nap, making the small sounds that would soon become a demand for attention. "I should get Samuel," Florence said, but did not immediately move. "In a minute," Yates said. "Let me just hold you a little longer." Florence smiled and settled back against her husband's chest. Samuel could wait another moment. This, right here, was everything. Her husband's arms around her, their children playing happily, their home secure and prosperous, their future full of promise. She had come west expecting an old man and a life of quiet duty. Instead, she had found a young cowboy who had said, "Surprise, it is me you are marrying," and had given her a life beyond her wildest dreams. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold, Florence Donovan counted herself the most fortunate woman alive. She had found love in the most unexpected way, and it had been worth every moment of uncertainty and fear. This was home. This was family. This was love. And it was everything she had never dared to hope for, but everything she would cherish for the rest of her days.